Okay. Let's see if I'm going to go up here. That's all I'm gonna do. All right. Tell me when, Liz.
No.
Welcome to this online edition of fundraising rules, if I can say that correctly. It's good to have you here. And we're going to go through a lot of the 10 basic rules of fundraising that I have discovered and many other people have discovered. It's not just from me. I've taken them from a lot of different people. I believe in research, which is taking the best from the best and making sure we pull them all together so it makes sense. One of the things I want to do with this is go over it enough times so that you can always see the dog in what we're doing. Now, our students that are here right now, can you see the dog?
Yep.
How long, have you seen this before?
No.
You saw it that fast?
Yep.
It took me forever. But once you see it, you'll always see it, right? And for those who don't see it right now, you're just gonna have to stare at it, and you can come back and look at it and see how it is. Is this okay right here? All right, okay. Yeah, just to give you a hint, his head is right there, he's down eating something, right? Good, yeah, of course, what are they gonna say? Okay, let's go to the next idea of the 10 rules. One of the things I haven't even put in here is as you're raising money, you've got to be very careful about the people who you engage in helping you raise money or who you raise money from. There are so many crooks, and then crooks are bad enough, but you can often smell them out and figure them out. Almost worse are the people who waste your time, who think they know what they're doing and say, oh, I'll raise your money, I can get it. Some of these people, they call themselves brokers, but they're there simply to make you broker. So you don't want to deal with them. I put this up because this guy right here, if you ever see him run, Manny was one of these guys, oh, I can raise millions of dollars, I've got the millions of dollars. They went on and on about all the stuff, and we spent days with him and dinners and all that. And we finally could see this is going nowhere. Now, we didn't spend 24-hour days, but an hour here or there. And we said, Manny, where's the money? Oh, it's coming. Well, as soon as you hear that, I probably have run into 15 to at least 15, probably more than 20 people just like that. They always have money, but it's never their own, and they're broke, and there's a reason they're broke. But they know somebody who knows somebody who might know somebody who might have money. So steer clear of them. We learn truth in 4 basic ways. Authority. What would you say authority is? Give me an example of an authority that you learned from.
Parents to kids.
Parents, kids,
I guess the teacher.
teachers, bosses, authorities, and I mean, there are people that you have identified that they have some experience and they know what to do. That's one way we do gain knowledge. Another way, an interesting one, is intuition. There's a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Blink. If you haven't read it, it's a really good one to read, and where he says the older you get, particularly after about 15, 16 years old, you've gained enough experience that you have an intuition, you have an intuitive sense if something's making sense or not. And many times we work hard to not trust our intuition. And we figure, well, I'm not smart enough or something. Put something in the back. Gladwell makes a great example of a museum in San Diego that got a statue from Iraq area. Large statue of a man, and it was supposed to be back in Nebuchadnezzar's time, and so this is a great piece of antiquity, startling in the discovery to be able to have this. And they said, well, but before we put it on display, we better make sure we authenticate it. And so they brought in all these experts, And in a couple of minutes, every one of them said it's a fake. I said, how do you know that? They went, we don't know. We've talked about it. None of us can figure out why we think it's a fake, but we're pretty sure it's a fake. They said, well, I need to have more than pretty sure for this thing to work out. So they spent quite a bit of time studying, and they finally came to the museum and said, we know what the problem is. It's perfect. Everything about it is perfect. And nothing from the Mesopotamia, Nebuchadnezzar era came out perfect. It wasn't built perfect in the first place. So somebody's been too perfect in what they're doing it. So how did they know that? How did they figure that out? In a couple minutes, how did they know it was a fake? It's because, like, inside of your head, you got all this knowledge and it's kind of whirling around like tumblers in a safe, and things just click into place, and your conscious mind isn't sure what it is, but your subconscious mind has figured it out. So we gain a lot of truth by paying attention to our intuition. Reason is, 1 + 1 = 2. There's gravity, there's water, these things, so they all come together, and we can figure it out by reasoning things out and taking information that way. And the last thing is sort of like it, but it's mainly that you've had a lot of experience in something, which has to do with a number of these things. But these are the basic ways we learn truth. And we're going to apply that to this rather difficult task of helping an entrepreneur raise money. There's kind of two schools of thought that go on simultaneously. One is that you will never be able to start a business without enough money. There's a lot to that. There's another school of thought that says if you get too much money, you're going to have a disaster on your hand. Now, I think the second one is an absolute. It's not quite, but it's sort of an absolute. You don't want to have too much money. But the first one is many businesses can start with very little money. And so you're going to have to be careful as you weigh how much money you're going to raise, that you find the right amount of money. Because you don't want to give up too much equity so that the next round of financing you have, there's no equity left to sell. Or you go to all this work and you have a couple % ownership in your own company because you've had to raise all this funds. So there's a balancing act. There's an art to raising money, and that's going to become critical for you. The questions are, why are you trying to raise money? Now, I think some of our students in our class, they've come up with some companies that said, well, I'm not sure if I need to raise some money. Well, as they've looked at it, they really did need to raise some money, as the students have talked to them and said, well, how are you going to pay for this marketing? How are you going to pay to hire more people? How are you going to do all these things? And they didn't know. And so they needed to discover the real reason why. Now, what's the instrument we've given you that you've worked on in order to help discover how much money you really do need from one scenario to another scenario? What is it? We taught last time.
The pro forma?
Pro forma. You can work it all out, the numbers on your computer, and you can see if we have this amount of money, we'll be able to afford this, and if we get these results, we should be able to repay, and all those things are worked out on the pro forma. The next thing you need to discover is from whom, and we're going to talk about that in a second, and the next steps to take. I've talked about this in the class before. I'm going to emphasize it again. There's a dual nature of marketing and salesmanship that go into presenting to an investor. The first rule is never oversell, and the best way to do that is don't use selling techniques, particularly in closing the deal. But do use good marketing and advertising techniques as you prepare the material. One of the fundamentals of advertising is education. You're educating and getting people excited about what your product, your idea is, and you're giving them lots of great information. So salesmanship is going to come into play. We'll discuss that as we go through. When you seek funding, we basically find that there's 3 kinds of funding you're going to go after with the traditional, alternative, and creative. Now, I put this picture up here for this young man who was seeking funds from a very sophisticated group of investors that he was standing before. Do you see any problems he's got going into it?
He's not looking at the investors,
Well, he was kind of doing that, but look at his clothes. You've got to be prepared to dress in a way and act in a way that's going to not put people off. A standard rule of any kind of dress is to dress 1 degree higher than the people you're presenting to. Not 5 degrees, but just kind of 1 step higher. Definitely never 1 step lower. You can be on a par, but generally you want to look out for what you're doing with that. Now here's a timeline for investors. Every product, every service when you raise funds has its own timeline. This is just one timeline I created for our automobile vehicle truck transmission. But it's all the same. It begins as a napkin idea and it ends, that's a napkin idea. You know what a napkin idea is? Napkin idea is you're sitting in the restaurant, you're talking to a friend and say, I got the greatest idea. Let me draw it out for you on this napkin. And you draw it out and it's such a good idea, an investment is made. Investments have been made at the napkin level. But sometimes it's not made until the product is finished and tested and you've won a championship with it and suddenly everybody's excited. So those are the extremes, and all the way along this continuum, investments are made. The further we get down, it's an intriguing concept here. It's a compelling, game-changing invention at this point. You need to know where you are in the level, but understanding the further along it moves here, the higher cost per share from the investment. Why? Because the risk is gone, or it's not gone, excuse me. It's diminishing. The risk is diminishing the further out you come. So take a look at that, and that will, you want to prepare one of these for the company you're studying and see how far along it is, and that'll tell you some of the things you're going to need to make sure are in your presentation. You know, if the build the proof of concept model is finished and you actually have received a patent and you have a metal proof prototype, you don't show anybody, you don't talk about this, it's done. And I realize that's intuitive to you, but I just want to emphasize it. Okay, now the first rule is using the law of concentric circles to find investors. Now I've given you here a bunch of potential places where people can hear about you and hear about what the product is. As you look at it, remember you're right here in the middle, you're the drip in the middle. And as you further out you go are other kinds of people. These are people who are closest to you, who you have a good relationship, who you have credibility with. That's the key. You've got credibility. The further out you go, they don't know you, they never heard of you, and you have zero credibility. As you can guess, which is the most difficult sale? The one without credibility, right? So as you look at that and say, how would you order those? So just take a minute and place these in order. For those watching, let's go ahead and pause and give you a chance. Now we're not going to pause, you're going to pause. Put it on pause and go ahead and put these in order. Okay? Did you pause the, go ahead and pause the